There's nothing quite like the heartbreak of watching everything your family built slip away. For Eli Stoltzfus, a 60-year-old Amish widower, 3 years of failed crops had brought him to the hardest decision of his life, selling the farm that had been in his family for 4 generations. The bank papers lay on his kitchen table, waiting to be signed. His 9-year-old granddaughter, Miriam, was visiting for the summer when she made a bold declaration. "Grossdaadi, I can save your farm." Eli just smiled, thinking it was innocent. Childhood optimism. But Miriam had been watching, learning, and thinking in ways that surprised him. Her simple ideas about the old equipment in the barn and the patterns she noticed in nature began to spark something Eli hadn't felt in years. Hope. Could the fresh eyes of a child really see what experience had missed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the withered cornfields as Eli Stoltzfus stood at his kitchen window, cradling a cup of black coffee that had grown cold in his weathered hands. The sight before him told a story of 3 consecutive seasons of disappointment, brown stalks that should have been green and gold, soil that had once been rich and dark, now cracked and tired. At 62, Eli had seen enough harvests to know when the land was speaking, and what it was saying broke his heart. The farmhouse around him held the silence of a man living alone. Sarah's chair at the kitchen table remained exactly where she had left it 2 years ago, her favorite blue cushion still bearing the gentle impression of her form. The morning routine that had once included her soft humming and the smell of fresh bread now consisted of reheated coffee and the weight of decisions he wasn't sure he had the strength to make. Eli moved through his chores with the mechanical precision of 4 decades of farming. The dairy cows, only 6 remaining from what had once been a herd of 20, needed milking and feeding. The chickens required grain and fresh water. The vegetable garden, smaller now than Sarah had kept, it needed weeding. Each task reminded him of how the farm had slowly contracted around his diminishing hope. Like a wounded animal curling in on itself, the wooden cross he had carved for Sarah's grave caught the morning light from where it sat on the windowsill, waiting for his weekly visit to the cemetery. Made from oak harvested from their own land, it bore the simple inscription, "Sarah Stoltzfus, beloved wife and mother, 1963 to 2022. Below that, in smaller letters, he had added the words that had sustained them through 38 years of marriage. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." That trust felt fragile these days. Not broken, never that, but stretched thin like old cloth that might tear if pulled too hard. The Amish community of Lancaster County had weathered economic storms before, but this felt different. Climate patterns that his father and grandfather had relied upon seemed to have shifted, leaving farmers like Eli grasping for wisdom that no longer applied to their changed world. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled Eli from his thoughts. Through the window, he watched his son David's pickup truck navigate the long driveway, dust rising in its wake. The sight brought a familiar mixture of joy and worry to Eli's chest. David had chosen a different path than his father, working as a carpenter in town rather than farming. But he had never lost his love for the land where he had grown up. The truck came to a stop near the back porch, and Eli watched as David stepped out, followed by a blur of summer dress and brown braids, Miriam, his granddaughter, practically vibrating with the energy that only 9-year-olds possessed. She had been counting the days until summer vacation, when she could spend weeks at the farm instead of just Sunday visits. "Grossdaadi," Miriam called out, using the Pennsylvania Dutch term for grandfather as she bounded up the porch steps. Her arms wrapped around Eli's waist with the fierce affection of a child who saw no reason to hold back her emotions. "I missed you so much. Can't we check the chickens first? And can I help with the milking?" And can we slow down, little one? Eli chuckled, his first genuine smile in days. The chickens will wait for us. The cows, too. There's plenty of summer ahead. David approached more slowly, his carpenter's hands resting on his daughter's shoulders. At 34, he carried himself with the careful precision of a man who had learned to measure twice and cut once. But Eli could see the concern in his son's eyes as they took in the state of the farm. "Dad, you look tired," David said, his voice gentle but direct. "Maybe too tired to be taking on a summer babysitting job." "It's not babysitting when it's family," Eli replied, ruffling Miriam's hair. "Besides, this old place needs some life in it." The 3 generations stood together on the porch that had welcomed 5 generations of Stoltzfus children, each one carrying forward the traditions and struggles of those who came before. The morning air held the scent of earth and growing things, though not as strongly as it should have during prime growing season. "Grossdaadi, what happened to all the corn?" Miriam asked with the directness that children possessed, pointing toward the failing fields. "It looks sad." Eli felt David's sharp glance and chose his words carefully. "Sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate the way we need it to. Sometimes the soil gets tired, even when we try to take good care of it." "Like when I get tired after playing too hard?" Miriam asked. "Something like that," Eli agreed, though his problems ran much deeper than simple exhaustion. David helped carry Miriam's small suitcase into the house, his eyes taking inventory of details his daughter wouldn't notice. The stack of unopened bills on the kitchen counter, the repair jobs that had been deferred, the subtle signs of a man trying to maintain a farm on a shrinking budget. Father and son exchanged a look over Miriam's head that communicated volumes without words. "I can pick her up next Friday if that's easier," David offered, but Eli shook his head. 2 weeks, as planned. She'd be good company. What he didn't say was that 2 weeks might be the last chance for Miriam to experience the farm as it had been for 4 generations. After that, it would belong to someone else, someone who might tear down the old farmhouse or convert the land to suburban development. After David left, Eli showed Miriam to her room, the same room where her father had slept as a boy, where Eli himself had dreamed of farming glory in his youth. The simple space held a single bed with one of Sarah's quilts, a wooden dresser painted white, and windows that looked out over the vegetable garden and the rolling fields beyond. "It's perfect, Grossdaadi," Miriam declared, bouncing on the bed to test its springiness. "Can we go exploring now? I want to see everything." The afternoon passed in a blur of rediscovery as Miriam reacquainted herself with the farm's rhythms. She gathered eggs with the practiced care of someone who had been doing it for years, her small hands gentle with the hens who remembered her from previous visits. She helped with the evening milking, chattering constantly about school and friends and the book she was reading about a girl who lived on a ranch. "Tell me about when you were little, Grossdaadi," she said as they walked back to the house in the gathering dusk. "What was the farm like then?" Eli found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, about learning to milk cows by hand when he was younger than Miriam, about helping his father with hay harvest, about the year they had raised prize-winning vegetables for the county fair. His voice took on warmth and life as he remembered times when the future had seemed certain, when the patterns of planting and harvest had felt as reliable as sunrise. "It sounds like magic," Miriam said, her hand tucked trustingly into his. "Like..." The farm was alive. "It was," Eli replied, surprised by the catch in his voice. "Your grandmother Sarah always said that farming wasn't just about growing crops. It was about growing hope." They reached the back porch just as the last light was fading from the western sky. Miriam paused at the bottom of the steps, looking back toward the fields that held so much history and so much uncertainty. "Grossdaadi," she said, her voice carrying a seriousness that seemed too old for her years. "What if the farm could be magic again?" Before Eli could answer, she had skipped up the steps and into the house, leaving him alone with the evening air and the weight of her question. What if, indeed? But magic required belief, and Eli's faith in miracles had been worn thin by 3 years of failure and the approaching reality of tomorrow's decision. Inside, as he helped Miriam prepare for bed, she made the declaration that would change everything. "Grossdaadi, I can save your farm." Eli stared at his granddaughter, her earnest face illuminated by the soft light of the kerosene lamp on her bedside table. The simple honesty in her declaration, "I can save your farm," hung in the air between them like a prayer offered by someone too young to understand how thoroughly God sometimes said no. "Is that so?" Eli asked gently, sitting down on the edge of her bed. "And how would you manage such a thing?" Miriam's eyes brightened with the confidence that came from never having learned that some problems were too big to solve. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Mama always says that when you really want to help someone, you find a way." The innocent faith in her voice made Eli's chest tighten. How could he explain to a 9-year-old that good intentions couldn't overcome market forces, weather patterns, and the simple mathematics of debt? How could he tell her that sometimes love wasn't enough to save what you cherished most? "Well, then," he said instead, "I suppose we'll have to see what you can discover." The next morning arrived gray and humid, with the promise of another sweltering day that would stress the already struggling crops. Eli rose before dawn, as he had every day for 40 years, moving through his morning routine while Miriam slept. The coffee was stronger today. He would need the energy for whatever enthusiasm his granddaughter brought to her mission. She appeared in the kitchen as he was finishing his second cup, her hair braided neatly and her summer dress practical for farm work. "Good morning, Grossdaadi. Where should we start?" "Start with what?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. "Saving the farm, of course. I've been thinking about it all night." Despite everything, Eli found himself smiling. "Have you now? And what did all that thinking tell you?" "That I need to understand what's wrong before I can fix it," Miriam replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating the obvious. "Like when the washing machine makes that funny noise Mama says you have to listen to figure out what's broken." The comparison was simple, but it carried a logic that resonated with Eli's practical nature. How long had it been since he had truly listened to what his land was trying to tell him, rather than simply going through the motions of farming routines that had once served him well? "Where would you like to begin this listening?" he asked. "In Grossmother Sarah's kitchen," Miriam said, using the Pennsylvania Dutch term for grandmother. "Mama always said she knew everything about making things grow." An hour later, they stood in the farmhouse kitchen as morning light streamed through windows that Sarah had kept spotlessly clean. Miriam had appointed herself chief investigator, methodically opening drawers and cabinets with the thoroughness of someone conducting important research. "What are all these?" she asked, pulling out a collection of small notebooks from the drawer beside the stove. Eli's breath caught as he recognized Sarah's handwriting on the worn covers. "Those are your grandmother's recipe books." But as Miriam opened the first notebook, it became clear that Sarah's definition of recipes had been considerably broader than most people's. Yes, there were instructions for making bread and preserving vegetables, but interspersed throughout were detailed notes about soil conditions, planting schedules, and natural remedies for common farming problems. "Look at this page," Miriam said, holding up the notebook. "It says, companion planting for strong soil, and there's a whole chart about which vegetables help each other grow." Eli leaned closer, squinting at his late wife's careful handwriting. He had forgotten about Sarah's methodical approach to the vegetable garden, her insistence that everything was connected in ways that weren't always obvious. She had tried to share this knowledge with him over the years, but he had been focused on the serious farming, the corn and soybeans that generated their primary income. "Here's another section," Miriam continued, flipping through pages with growing excitement. Natural pest control and soil health. She wrote down recipes for making compost tea and something called beneficial bacteria solutions. Page after page revealed a treasure trove of agricultural wisdom that Sarah had quietly accumulated over decades of careful observation. She had noted weather patterns, tracked the success and failure of different planting strategies, and developed a sophisticated understanding of sustainable farming practices that Eli had never fully appreciated. "Grossdaadi, look at this," Miriam said, her voice dropping to the hushed tone reserved for important discoveries. "She wrote about your corn problems." Eli's hands trembled slightly as he took the notebook. There, in Sarah's familiar script, was an entry dated just 3 years ago. "Eli's worried about the corn again. Same problems Dad used to have in the 40s when they pushed too hard with the same crops. The soil needs a rest and variety. Maybe time to try the old rotation methods Mama taught me. 3 sisters planting corn, beans, squash together. Corn gives support, beans add nitrogen, squash keeps weeds down and soil moist. Worked for the Indians for centuries." The entry continued, with detailed notes about soil testing, natural fertilizers, and a multi-year plan for restoring the land's health. Sarah had seen the problems coming and had developed solutions, but she had never pressed her ideas on him, knowing his pride in his own farming expertise. "She knew," Eli whispered, more to himself than to Miriam. "She saw what was happening, and she knew how to fix it. So we can use her ideas?" Miriam asked, her face bright with possibility. "We can try what she wrote down." Eli felt something shift inside his chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the space where hope might take root. "I suppose we could try a few things. But Miriam, you have to understand that farming is complicated. Even good ideas don't always work the way we want them to." "But they might work," she insisted, "and if we don't try, we'll never know." The simple truth of her words hit Eli harder than he expected. When had he stopped believing in possibilities? When had he begun accepting failure as inevitable rather than fighting for the land that had sustained his family for generations? They spent the rest of the morning reading through Sarah's notebooks, Miriam asking questions that forced Eli to think about farming practices he had taken for granted. Why did they plant the same crops in the same fields every year? Why didn't they test the soil regularly? Why had they stopped using the composting methods that Sarah had sworn by? "This is like solving a puzzle," Miriam said, as she copied some of Sarah's diagrams into a new notebook she had found. "All the pieces are here. We just have to figure out how they fit together." By afternoon, Eli found himself agreeing to small experiments. They would test a section of soil using methods described in Sarah's notes. They would try companion planting in the vegetable garden. They would examine some of the old farming equipment in the barn to see if any of Sarah's suggested tools were still functional. It wasn't a complete transformation of his thinking. Eli was too practical and had been disappointed too many times to embrace wild optimism. But for the first time in months, he was planning for something other than surrender. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sun set behind the struggling cornfields, Miriam made an observation that stopped Eli cold. "You know." "What?" "Grossdaadi. I think Grossmother Sarah left these notebooks for us to find. I think she knew we would need them." Eli considered this possibility as he looked at the leather-bound journal in his lap, filled with his late wife's quiet wisdom and patient hope. Sarah had never been one to give up on anything, not on difficult seasons, not on struggling plants, and certainly not on the farm that had been her home for nearly 4 decades. Maybe, Eli thought as he watched his granddaughter sketch plans for tomorrow's soil testing. Maybe Sarah was still trying to help them save what they all loved most. The bank papers still sat on his kitchen table, but for the first time in weeks, Eli wasn't certain he would sign them. The barn had always been Miriam's favorite place on The farm a cathedral of weathered wood and filtered sunlight, where the scent of hay and old leather seemed to hold the memories of generations. But this morning, as she pushed open the heavy wooden doors with Eli beside her, she looked at the familiar space with new eyes. "All this equipment," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Why isn't it being used anymore?" Eli followed her gaze across the collection of machinery that represented decades of farming evolution. Modern tractors sat beside horse-drawn plows. Electric milking equipment shared space with hand tools that his grandfather had used. And in the far corner, covered by a canvas tarp, sat the piece of equipment that had sparked Miriam's curiosity the night before. "Some of it's too old to be practical," Eli explained, though even as he said it, he wondered if that was entirely true. Farming methods change. What worked for my grandfather might not make sense today. Miriam walked directly to the covered equipment in the corner, her small hands tugging at the heavy canvas. "What about this one? You said it was a seed separator?" Eli helped her pull away the tarp, revealing a mechanical contraption that looked like something from another era. The hand-cranked seed separator was indeed a relic from the 1940s. Built by his grandfather Otto, had decided that sorting seeds by hand was too time-consuming for the expanding farm operation. Grossdaadi Otto bought this in 1947, Eli said, running his hand along the machine's cast-iron frame. "It separates good seeds from bad ones, sorts them by size, removes chaff and debris. He used to say it could do the work of 10 men in half the time. Does it still work?" Eli examined the machine more closely than he had in years. The metal showed surface rust, but appeared structurally sound. The hand crank moved smoothly when he tested it, and the sorting screen seemed intact. It would need some oil and cleaning, but the basic mechanism seemed solid. "Why did you stop using it?" It was a simple question that didn't have a simple answer. When the bigger farms started using industrial seed suppliers, it seemed easier to buy pre-sorted seeds than to process our own. More expensive, but easier. But what if easier isn't better? Miriam asked with the directness that children possessed. What if the old way worked better for our kind of farm? The question hung in the dusty air between them. When had easier become more important than better? When had he started assuming that newer methods were automatically superior to the knowledge his grandfather had accumulated through decades of patient trial and error? They spent the morning exploring the barn's forgotten corners, discovering tools and techniques that had been abandoned in the name of modernization. Miriam found hand-forged hoes that felt perfectly balanced in her small hands, wooden seed trays designed for optimal germination, and a collection of measuring devices that her great-great-grandfather had used to track soil conditions with scientific precision. "It's like a museum," she said, "but everything still works." By afternoon, they had cleared a workspace around the seed separator and begun the process of restoration. Eli found himself remembering skills he hadn't used in decades as he disassembled, cleaned, and oiled the machine's components. Miriam proved to be an excellent assistant, her small fingers able to reach places his couldn't, her patience better suited to detailed work than his had ever been. "Tell me about Grossdaadi Otto," she said as they worked. "What was he like?" Eli paused in his cleaning of a gear assembly, letting his mind drift back to childhood memories of a man who had seemed larger than life. He was stubborn as a mule and twice as smart. Never threw anything away that might be useful someday. Your grandmother Sarah used to say he could fix anything with baling wire and prayer. "Like you," Miriam said matter-of-factly. "I'm not sure I'm as clever as he was, but you're fixing this machine, and you're teaching me how it works. That seems pretty clever to me." The sound of a truck in the driveway interrupted their work. Through the barn door, Eli could see Jakob Byler climbing out of his pickup, the older Amish man moving with the careful gait of someone whose back had been bent by decades of hard work. "Eli," Jakob called out as he approached the barn. Heard you might be making some decisions about the farm. Jakob Byler had been their neighbor for 30 years, a good man whose own farm had prospered through careful management, and Eli had, to admit, better luck with weather patterns. At 70, Jakob was looking to expand his operation for his growing number of sons and grandsons. "Jakob," Eli replied, emerging from the barn with Miriam beside him. "What brings you by?" "Wanted to talk to you about your South 40 acres, Jakob said, his tone respectful but businesslike. "Been thinking it might make sense to add it to my holdings. Good drainage, close to my property line. Could make you a fair offer." The practical part of Eli's mind recognized the logic in Jakob's suggestion. Selling part of the land could provide enough money to pay down debts without losing the entire farm. It was a compromise that might allow him to keep the farmhouse and maybe a small garden plot. But Miriam spoke before Eli could respond. "We're not selling anything," she said, with the confidence of someone who had never learned to doubt her own convictions. "We're fixing the farm instead." Jakob smiled indulgently at her. "Is that so, little one? And how do you plan to manage that?" "With this," Miriam said, gesturing toward the partially restored seed separator. "And with Grossmother Sarah's wisdom, and with all the tools and knowledge that nobody's been using." Jakob's expression grew more serious as he looked at the equipment they had been working on. "That's your grandfather's old separator, isn't it, Eli? Haven't seen one of those in operation for 20 years. We're going to make it work again," Miriam continued, undaunted by the skepticism in Jakob's voice. "And we're going to use the old planting methods that worked for 100 years. And we're going to make the soil healthy again." Eli felt a mixture of pride and concern at his granddaughter's passionate declaration. Her certainty was admirable, but he didn't want her to be crushed by the weight of adult realities. "That sounds like a fine project for the summer," Jakob said diplomatically. "But Eli, if you change your mind about the land, the offer stands. Sometimes it's better to sell part of something than to lose all of it." After Jakob left, Eli and Miriam returned to their work on the separator. But the neighbor's visit had introduced a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Miriam seemed to sense the shift in mood. "You're not going to sell, are you, Grossdaadi?" she asked quietly. "I don't know, little one. Sometimes adults have to make decisions that children might not understand. But what if we can make the farm work again? What if all these old things are better than we thought?" Eli looked at the seed separator, now gleaming with fresh oil and careful attention. In just a few hours, they brought a piece of family history back to functional life. What other possibilities had he overlooked in his rush toward modern solutions? "Tell you what," he said, making a decision that surprised him. "Let's get this machine working properly. And let's try some of your grandmother's ideas in the garden. If we can prove that the old methods still have value, maybe we'll have more options to consider." Miriam's smile was brilliant enough to light up the dusty barn. "We're going to save the farm, Grossdaadi. I know we are." As the afternoon sun slanted through the barn's weathered boards, Eli found himself believing for the first time in months that she might be right. 3 days into their restoration project, Miriam made another discovery that changed everything. While Eli worked on reassembling the seed separator's sorting mechanisms, she had been exploring the farmhouse with the systematic thoroughness of a detective, following important clues. "Grossdaadi, come look at this," her voice called from the small study off the main hallway. Eli found her sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his father's old desk, surrounded by papers and notebooks she had pulled from the bottom drawer. In her lap sat a leather-bound journal that he recognized but hadn't opened in years. "Is this Grossdaadi Otto's weather book?" she asked, holding up the journal with reverent care. Eli's breath caught as he recognized his father's meticulous handwriting on the warm cover. Weather and crop records. 1965 to 1995. Otto Stoltzfus had been obsessive about documentation. recording daily weather conditions, soil temperatures, rainfall amounts, and crop yields with the precision of a scientist conducting a 30-year experiment. "Where did you find that?" Eli asked, settling down beside her on the braided rug. "It was stuck way in the back of the drawer, behind all these other papers. Look what's inside." Miriam opened the journal to reveal page after page of detailed entries, each one a snapshot of a specific day's conditions and observations. But more than just raw data, Otto had included analysis and insights that revealed deep understanding of the relationship between weather patterns and agricultural success. "He wrote about everything," Miriam said, flipping through the pages. Temperature, wind direction, how much rain fell, what the animals were doing, whether the soil felt right for planting. And look, he drew charts and graphs to show how everything connected. Eli leaned closer, amazed at the sophistication of his father's record-keeping. Otto had tracked correlations between barometric pressure and plant growth, documented the effects of moon phases on soil moisture, and identified weather patterns that preceded both successful and failed harvests. "This entry is from 1978, Miriam said, pointing to a page that had been marked with a small piece of red ribbon. "He wrote about a year when the corn failed because of too much rain early and not enough rain later. But look what he says here. Should have planted the heritage varieties that Sarah's mother recommended. They handle weather swings better than the new hybrids." The observation hit Eli like a physical blow. The weather pattern Otto had described was almost identical to what they had experienced over the past 3 years. His father had faced similar challenges and had identified potential solutions that Eli had never considered. "Keep reading," Miriam urged, her excitement growing as she turned pages. "He writes about soil health and crop rotation and all sorts of things that match what Grossmother Sarah wrote about in her recipe books." Page after page revealed a treasure trove of agricultural wisdom that had been sitting unread in the desk drawer for decades. Otto had documented successful strategies for dealing with drought, excessive moisture, pest problems, and soil depletion. More importantly, he had noted which solutions worked and which ones failed, creating a practical guide for handling the exact challenges that had been overwhelming Eli. "Look at this section," Miriam said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she were sharing a secret. "It's about the 3 years from 1982 to 1984. He says they had the same kind of weather problems we're having now, and he tried different things until he figured out what worked." Eli read over her shoulder, his heart pounding as he recognized weather patterns and crop failures that mirrored his recent experiences. But unlike Eli's recent seasons of mounting desperation, Otto's journal showed a methodical approach to problem solving that had ultimately led to recovery and improved yields. The key, Otto had written in his careful script, is not to fight the weather but to work with it. Different conditions require different crops, different planting schedules, different soil treatments. The land wants to be productive. Our job is to listen to what it needs. "He sounds like he was a scientist," Miriam observed. "He was in his own way," Eli replied, remembering his father's endless curiosity about the natural world. Always testing new ideas, always trying to understand why some things worked and others didn't. They spent the morning reading through Otto's entries, Miriam asking questions that forced Eli to think about farming practices from entirely new perspectives. Why had he abandoned his father's detailed record-keeping? Why had he stopped paying attention to the subtle environmental cues that Otto had considered essential information? "Look at these numbers," Miriam said, pointing to a chart Otto had drawn showing corn yields over a 15-year period. "Some years were really good, some were terrible, but most were somewhere in the middle." And he writes about what made the difference each time. How I studied the chart, recognizing patterns he had forgotten over the years. His father's most successful seasons hadn't necessarily been the ones with perfect weather. They had been the years when Otto had best adapted his methods to whatever conditions nature provided. "We should make our own weather book," Miriam announced with the decisiveness of someone who had solved an important puzzle. "We can record everything that happens this summer and compare it to what Grossdaadi Otto wrote about similar conditions." The idea made perfect sense, though Eli wondered why it had taken a 9-year-old to suggest it. "That's a fine idea. But what would we record?" "Everything," Miriam said, jumping up to find paper and pencils. "Weather, soil conditions, what the animals are doing, how the plants look, which of Grossmother Sarah's ideas work best. And we can test the old seeds with the separator and see if they grow better than the new ones." By afternoon, they had established a daily routine of observation and documentation. Miriam proved to have a natural gift for noticing details that adults often overlooked, the way the chickens behaved before rain, the subtle color changes in soil that indicated moisture levels, the patterns in plant growth that suggested optimal spacing and timing. "The separator is ready to test," Eli announced as they completed their first day's weather observations. "Want to see if your theory about old equipment is correct?" The restored seed separator performed better than either of them had expected. The hand crank turned smoothly. The sorting screen separated seeds by size and quality with impressive accuracy, and the debris removal system worked exactly as Otto had designed it 60 years earlier. "It's like it was waiting for us to remember how to use it," Miriam said as she watched perfectly sorted seeds flow into collection bins. They tested seeds that had been stored in the barn for several seasons, comparing them to the expensive hybrid varieties that Eli had been purchasing from agricultural suppliers. To his surprise, many of the older seeds showed better germination rates and appeared more resistant to the stress conditions that had been plaguing his recent crops. "Maybe Grossdaadi Otto and Grossmother Sarah knew something about farming that we forgot," Miriam observed as they cleaned up their work area. That evening, as they sat on the front porch reviewing the day's observations, David arrived for his weekly visit. He found them surrounded by notebooks, charts, and what appeared to be detailed scientific documentation. "What's all this?" he asked, settling into the chair that had once been his mother's favorite. "We're solving the farm's problems," Miriam announced proudly, using science and old wisdom and really good record-keeping. David picked up Otto's weather journal, his expression growing more serious as he recognized the sophistication of his grandfather's work. "I remember Dad always writing in these books, but I never paid much attention to what he was recording." "Neither did I," Eli admitted. "Should have been paying closer attention to what the older generation was trying to teach us." "So, what have you learned?" David asked, and Eli could hear genuine curiosity in his son's voice, rather than the polite skepticism he had expected. Miriam launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their discoveries, showing David the connections between Sarah's farming notes and Otto's weather observations, demonstrating how the restored seed separator worked, and outlining their plans for implementing traditional farming methods that had been proven effective under similar conditions. "It's actually quite logical," David said when she finished, his carpenter's appreciation for systematic problem-solving evident in his tone. "You're using historical data to inform current decisions." "Exactly," Miriam exclaimed. "And tomorrow, we're going to start testing soil samples to see which areas need what kind of help." As David prepared to leave, he pulled Eli aside for a private conversation. "She's really onto something, isn't she?" Eli nodded, surprised by his own growing confidence in their approach. "More than I expected. Your daughter has a gift for seeing patterns and connections that I've been missing. Maybe you should give her more time to work on this project," David suggested. "I could extend her visit if you think it would be helpful." For the first time in months, Eli found himself looking forward to tomorrow's work rather than dreading another day of mounting problems. I think that would be very helpful indeed. The basement of the farmhouse had always been Sarah's domain, a cool, quiet space where she had transformed the farm's harvest into preserved foods that sustained the family through winter months. Miriam discovered it on a fifth day at the farm, following a narrow wooden staircase that led down from the kitchen pantry. "Grossdaadi, you need to see this," she called up from below, her voice carrying a note of wonder that had become familiar over their days of exploration. Eli descended the steep stairs carefully, ducking his head to avoid the low ceiling beams. What he found stopped him in his tracks. The basement was lined with wooden shelving that held hundreds of mason jars in various sizes, their glass surfaces gleaming despite years of storage. Labels in Sarah's careful handwriting identified the contents. Pickled beets -2019, apple butter -2020, green bean relish -2021. She kept making preserves even after she got sick. Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected. "I thought she had stopped canning years ago." Miriam moved among the shelves like a curator in a museum, reading labels and examining the contents with scientific interest. "Look at all the different things she made. Pickles, jams, jellies, relishes, sauces. And here's a whole section of things I've never heard of: chow-chow, piccalilli, bread and butter pickles." Beyond the preserved foods, the basement contained an entire canning operation that appeared ready for immediate use. Large pots for water bath processing, pressure, canners for vegetables, cooling racks, and specialized tools hung from hooks on the ceiling beams. A work table held scales, measuring cups, and reference books about food preservation that were marked with bookmarks and handwritten notes. "She made this for the church social last summer," Eli said, picking up a jar of strawberry preserves. With shaking hands, "I remember her saying she wanted to contribute something special, even though the cancer treatments made everything so difficult for her." "Was she famous for her preserves?" Miriam asked, settling down beside a wooden crate filled with empty jars. Famous might not be the right word, but everyone in the community knew about Sarah's preserves. People used to come from 3 counties over to buy her pickles and jams at the farmer's market. She stopped selling them when I told her the farm needed to focus on cash crops. The admission hung heavy in the cool air of the basement. How many of Sarah's contributions to the farm's success had he dismissed as side projects while he focused on what he considered serious agriculture? "Why? Did you want her to stop?" Miriam asked with the directness that children possessed. "Because preserved foods seemed like small money compared to corn and soybeans," Eli replied, hearing the foolishness in his own words as he spoke them. "I thought we needed to think bigger, focus on crops that could generate substantial income. But what if lots of small money adds up to big money?" Miriam asked, beginning to organize the jars by type and date. "And what if people really want to buy things that taste good and are made with care?" The question sparked memories that Eli had buried under years of agricultural stress. Sarah's preserves had indeed generated steady income, not dramatic amounts, but reliable money that had helped cover household expenses and provided a buffer during difficult farming seasons. More importantly, her reputation for quality had brought customers to the farm who often purchased other products as well. "Let's see if any of these are still good," Miriam suggested, holding up a jar of peach preserves from the previous summer. "If they are, maybe we can figure out how she made them and start making more." They carried several jars upstairs for inspection, and Eli was amazed to discover that Sarah's preserving techniques had been so precise that the foods were still perfectly safe and delicious. Months after her death, the peach preserves tasted like sunshine in summer. The pickled vegetables retained their crisp texture and complex flavors, and the apple butter had a richness that store-bought versions could never match. "These are better than anything I've ever tasted," Miriam declared after sampling several varieties. "People would definitely pay money for food this good." That afternoon, They began exploring Sarah's canning operation in earnest. Her reference books contained detailed instructions for every aspect of food preservation, from selecting the best ingredients to timing processing methods for optimal flavor and safety. More importantly, the margins were filled with Sarah's personal notes about modifications and improvements she had developed over decades of experimentation. She wrote about everything, Miriam observed, reading through a section on pickle making. Which cucumbers work best, how long to soak them, in salt water, what spices to add for different flavors. It's like having a masterclass from an expert. Eli found himself remembering details about Sarah's preserving work that he had forgotten over the years. How she would rise early during harvest season to begin the day's canning while the kitchen was still cool. How she tested every batch for quality before sealing the jars. How she kept detailed records of which recipes were most popular with customers. We could start small, Miriam suggested as they examined the current state of the vegetable garden. Make preserves from the vegetables that are growing well. Test the recipes to make sure we can do them right. Then maybe expand if people like what we make. The garden, despite Eli's recent neglect, still contained a surprising variety of vegetables that were approaching harvest readiness. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vines. Cucumber plants sprawled across their designated areas, and the herb garden Sarah had maintained showed signs of vigorous growth despite minimal attention. Your grandmother always said that vegetables grown with love taste better than ones grown for profit, Eli told Miriam as they harvested their first batch of canning. Ingredients. Maybe she was right about that too. They spent the evening reviewing Sarah's canning procedures and planning their first preservation project. Miriam proved to have inherited her grandmother's attention to detail, carefully measuring ingredients and timing each step according to Sarah's meticulous instructions. This is like chemistry, she said as she helped Eli sterilize jars and prepare the water bath canner. Everything has to be exactly right or it won't work properly. Their first batch of bread and butter pickles emerged from the canning process, looking exactly like the samples they had found in storage. The jars sealed with satisfying pops as they cooled, and the kitchen filled with the sweet and tangy aroma that Eli remembered from countless summer evenings when Sarah had worked her. Preservation magic. Do you think they'll taste as good as Grossmutter's? Miriam asked as they labeled the completed jars. We'll find out in a few weeks when they've had time to develop their flavors, Eli replied. But I have a feeling your grandmother's recipes don't fail when they're followed carefully. That night, as they cleaned up the kitchen and stored their first batch of preserves in the basement, Eli found himself thinking about the broader implications of their experiment. Sarah's food preservation operation represented more than just a way to use excess vegetables. It was a complete approach to farming that valued quality over quantity, sustainability over short-term profit, and community connection over anonymous commodity sales. Grossdaadi, Miriam said as they turned off the basement lights. I think Grossmother Sarah was running a business down here, wasn't she? I think you're right, Eli replied, finally beginning to understand what he had lost when he convinced his wife to abandon her preserving work. And I think it might have been a better business than I realized. As they climbed the stairs to the main floor, Eli found himself calculating the potential income from a revived preservation operation. If they could produce the volume and quality that Sarah had achieved, if they could rebuild her customer base and perhaps expand it through farmers markets and direct sales, the preserved foods business might generate enough income to significantly reduce the farm's financial pressures. For the first time in months, Eli fell asleep thinking about possibilities rather than problems. Miriam's scientific approach to farming reached new heights during their second week together when she discovered Sarah's soil testing kit tucked away in the workshop behind the barn. The wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, contained glass vials, measuring spoons, color charts, and instruction booklets that had been carefully preserved despite years of storage. What does soil testing tell us? she asked as they carried the kit to the garden area where their preservation vegetables were thriving. "It tells us what the soil needs to be healthy," Eli explained, surprised by how much he remembered about testing procedures he hadn't used in over a decade. Different plants need different nutrients, and soil that looks good on the surface might be missing important elements underneath. The testing process proved to be more engaging than either of them had expected. Following Sarah's detailed instructions, they collected soil samples from various locations around the farm, mixed them with testing solutions, and compared the resulting colors to charts that indicated pH levels, nitrogen content, phosphorus availability, and potassium concentrations. This section by the old chicken coop tests completely different from the area near the barn, Miriam observed, holding up 2 vials that showed dramatically different colors. The chicken coop soil is much more acidic, and it has way more nitrogen. Eli studied the results with growing amazement. The variations in soil composition across different areas of the farm were more significant than he had realized, explaining why some crops thrived in certain locations while struggling in others. Sarah's systematic approach to soil testing revealed patterns that random planting had never been able to capitalize on. "Your grandmother kept records of all her soil tests," he said, pulling out a notebook from the kit. "Look at this." She mapped out the entire farm according to soil conditions and matched crops to areas where they would perform best. Sarah's soil maps were works of art as much as science, hand-drawn diagrams that showed the farm divided into zones based on pH levels, drainage patterns, sun exposure, and nutrient availability. Colored pencils indicated which areas were best suited for tomatoes, which sections favored root vegetables, and where herbs would flourish with minimal intervention. She treated different parts of the farm like different farms, Miriam said, studying the maps with the intensity of someone solving an important puzzle. Each area got exactly what it needed instead of everything getting the same treatment. The revelation hit Eli with the force of a physical blow. For years, he had been applying identical fertilizers, planting schedules, and cultivation methods across the entire farm, assuming that what worked in one area would work everywhere. Sarah's approach suggested that successful farming required treating each section of land according to its unique characteristics and needs. "Let's test the areas where your corn has been failing," Miriam suggested, carrying the testing kit toward the troubled fields that had prompted thoughts of selling the farm. The results were eye-opening. The soil in the failed corn sections showed severe depletion of key nutrients, pH levels that were far from optimal for corn production, and signs of compaction that would prevent proper root development. But more importantly, the testing revealed that these areas would be excellent for other crops that thrived in different soil conditions. According to Grossmother's maps, this section used to be where she grew her best potatoes, Miriam said, comparing their test results to Sarah's historical data. "The soil conditions are perfect for root vegetables, but terrible for corn. So we've been trying to grow the wrong crops in this area," Eli said, the simplicity of the solution making him feel foolish for not recognizing it sooner. "Not wrong crops," Miriam corrected with the diplomacy of someone who understood that adults sometimes needed their mistakes reframed as learning opportunities. "Just crops that would be happier somewhere else." They spent the afternoon testing soil throughout the farm and comparing their results to Sarah's maps and recommendations. Area after area revealed mismatches between current land use and optimal soil conditions, explaining years of disappointing yields and mounting frustration. "We can fix this," Miriam announced as they compiled their testing data. "We just need to plant things where they want to grow instead of where we think they should grow." That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Yoder, an elderly Amish woman who had been Sarah's closest friend, arrived just as Eli and Miriam were finishing their soil analysis on the front porch. "Heard you two have been busy as bees this summer," Rebecca said, settling into the rocking chair that had been Sarah's favorite. Wanted to see what all the excitement was about. Miriam launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their discoveries, showing Rebecca the restored equipment, Sarah's recipe books, Otto's weather, journals, and their soil testing results. Rebecca listened with the patient attention of someone who had spent 70 years observing the cycles of farm life. Your grandmother tried to share all this knowledge with the community, Rebecca said when Miriam finished her presentation, but folks were more interested in modern methods than old wisdom. She used to say that someday people would remember why the traditional ways worked so well. Did she really know all this when she was alive? Miriam asked. Child, your grandmother forgot more about farming than most people ever learn, Rebecca replied with a gentle smile. She could look at a plant and tell you what it needed test. Soil with her hands and know exactly what would grow best there. But she was modest about her knowledge, never pushed it on anyone who wasn't ready to listen. Rebecca's visit sparked memories that Eli had buried under years of agricultural frustration. Sarah had indeed tried to share her insights about soil, management, companion planting, and sustainable farming practices. But he had been focused on maximizing short-term yields and hadn't appreciated the long-term value of her approach. She left detailed instructions for crop rotation that would restore your soil health. Rebecca continued, pulling a folded paper from her handbag. Asked me to give this to you if you ever seemed ready to try her methods. The paper contained a 5-year plan for rotating crops across different sections of the farm, designed to restore soil nutrients naturally while maintaining productive yields. Sarah had even included suggestions for companion planting that would reduce pest problems and improve overall plant health. It's like she knew exactly what we would need, Miriam said, studying the rotation plan with fascination. She knew because she paid attention, Rebecca replied. Watched the land, listened to what it was trying to tell her, kept records so she could learn from both successes and failures. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she made an observation that reframed everything they had discovered. You know, Sarah always said that farming wasn't about forcing the land to do what you wanted. It was about learning what the land wanted to do and helping it succeed. After Rebecca left, Eli and Miriam sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind fields that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than problems. The soil testing had revealed challenges, but it had also provided clear guidance for addressing those challenges systematically. Tomorrow we start implementing Grossmutter's rotation plan, Miriam announced as they prepared to go inside. Tomorrow, we start learning to farm the way your grandmother tried to teach us, Eli agreed, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing from his work for years. That night, as he reviewed Sarah's crop rotation plan and soil improvement strategies, Eli realized that his late wife had left him more than recipes and equipment. She had left him a complete philosophy of farming that valued long-term sustainability over short-term profits, that worked with natural systems rather than against them, and that treated each piece of land as a unique partner in the agricultural process. For the first time since Sarah's death, Eli felt connected to something larger than his immediate problems. He was beginning to understand that saving the farm wasn't just about generating enough income to pay the bills. It was about rediscovering a relationship with the land that honored both tradition and innovation, both proven wisdom and fresh perspectives. The bank papers still sat on his kitchen table, but they no longer represented his only option. Thanks to a 9-year-old's curiosity and a dead woman's patient teaching, Eli was beginning to believe that the farm's best days might still lie ahead. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning while Miriam was helping Eli organize Sarah's recipe collection for easier reference. They had been working systematically through the notebooks, copying the most useful farming information into a master reference guide, when Miriam noticed something unusual about the largest recipe book. Grossdaadi. This book feels thicker than it looks, she said, running her fingers along the leather binding. Like there's something hidden inside the back cover. Eli examined the book more closely, realizing that what he had always assumed was simply thick leather binding actually consisted of two pieces glued together with something flat pressed between them. The years had loosened the adhesive slightly, creating a small gap that Miriam's sharp eyes had detected. "Should we look inside?" she asked, her voice hushed with the reverence of someone who understood they might be about to uncover something important. With careful fingers, Eli worked the gap wider until he could see that an envelope had been sealed between the layers of leather. Sarah's handwriting on the yellowed paper read, "For Eli, when the farm needs saving." The envelope came free with gentle persistence, revealing a thick packet of papers that had been hidden for an unknown number of years. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded documents that appeared to be legal papers, complete with official seals and witness signatures. "What is it?" Miriam asked, leaning closer to examine the formal legal language that meant nothing to her 9-year-old. Understanding. Eli read the documents twice before their meaning fully registered. "It's a mineral rights deed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From 1923, when my great-grandfather bought this land. It grants the Stoltzfus family permanent rights to all minerals beneath the property." The deed was comprehensive and clearly written, establishing that while the Stoltzfus family had sold surface rights to various parcels over the years, they had retained ownership of everything below ground level, including limestone, gravel, sand, and any other geological resources that might prove valuable. "Does that mean we own rocks?" Miriam asked with the practical curiosity of someone trying to understand adult complexities. "It means we own very valuable rocks," Eli replied, studying a geological survey that had been included with the deed. "Limestone, especially. This area sits on top of one of the richest limestone deposits in Lancaster County." The survey, conducted in 1961 but never acted upon, indicated that the Stoltzfus property contained approximately 40 acres of high-grade limestone suitable for construction and agricultural use. The report estimated that careful quarrying could provide a steady income stream for decades without significantly impacting surface farming operations. "Why didn't anyone ever tell you about this?" Miriam asked. "I don't think anyone knew except your grandmother," Eli said, examining a handwritten note that Sarah had tucked into the envelope. "Look at this letter she wrote." Sarah's letter was dated just 6 months before her death, written in the careful script of someone who knew her time was limited, but had important information to preserve. "My dear Eli, if you are reading this, it means the farm is in trouble, and you have finally discovered my secret. I have known about these mineral rights for 20 years. Ever since I found the deed while cleaning out your father's papers after he died. I wanted to tell you, but I knew your pride would make it difficult to accept help, even help that came from your own family's foresight. The limestone on our property is some of the finest in the county. I had tested quietly by a geologist from Penn State who confirmed that we could lease quarrying rights for substantial annual payments without damaging the farmland above. The income would be enough to make the farm profitable again and secure our family's future for generations. I kept this secret because I wanted you to succeed through your own farming skills first. But I also wanted to make sure this information would be available when it was truly needed. If you are reading this now, it means that time has come. Trust in the Lord, trust in the land, and trust in the wisdom that has sustained our family for generations. The answer to our problems was here all along. We just needed eyes to see it. With all my love, Sarah." Eli's eyes filled with tears as he finished reading his wife's letter. The woman who had quietly supported his farming dreams for nearly 4 decades had been protecting their future, even when he couldn't see past his immediate struggles. "She saved the farm for us," Miriam said softly, her child's understanding cutting straight to the heart of the matter. She kept the secret safe until we needed it. That afternoon, Eli called a local attorney to verify the legal validity of the mineral rights deed. The lawyer confirmed that the documents were authentic and legally binding, establishing clear ownership of subsurface rights that could indeed be leased to quarrying operations. Limestone is in high demand right now, the attorney explained during their phone conversation. Construction industry is booming, and high-grade limestone like yours commands premium prices. You could potentially lease the rights for enough annual income to eliminate your farm's financial problems entirely. The revelation changed everything, but not in the way Eli had expected. Rather than feeling immediate relief, he found himself grappling with complex emotions about Sarah's decision to keep such crucial information secret for so many years. "Are you angry that she didn't tell you?" Miriam asked as they walked through the fields that evening, seeing the land with new understanding of what lay beneath its surface. "Not angry," Eli said after long consideration. "Grateful, but also sorry that she felt she couldn't share this burden with me while she was alive. Maybe she knew you needed to discover other things first," Miriam suggested with the insight that children sometimes possessed about adult motivations, like how to use Grossdaadi Auto's equipment and her farming knowledge. Maybe the money was meant to be the last piece of the puzzle, not the first. The observation struck Eli as profoundly wise. If Sarah had revealed the mineral rights years earlier, he might have relied on that income rather than learning to farm more effectively. He might have missed the opportunity to rediscover traditional farming wisdom, to reconnect with his granddaughter, and to understand the deeper lessons about sustainability and stewardship that the land had been trying to teach him. "So what do we do now?" Miriam asked. "Now we finish what we started," Eli replied, his voice carrying a confidence that had been missing for months. "We implement your grandmother's farming methods. We continue building the preservation business, and we use the mineral rights income to secure the farm's future without abandoning everything we've learned about working with the land." That night, as they sat on the front porch planning their next steps, Eli felt a profound sense of connection to the generations that had come before him. His great-grandfather had possessed the foresight to retain mineral rights that would prove valuable a century later. His father had documented farming wisdom that could guide current decisions. His wife had protected family resources while encouraging him to find his own path to success. The farm was never really in danger of being lost, he told Miriam as they prepared for bed. "We just needed to remember everything our family had learned about taking care of it. And we needed fresh eyes to see the old wisdom," Miriam added, a 9-year-old perspective having proved more valuable than decades of adult experience. The bank papers were still on Eli's kitchen table, but they would remain unsigned. The Stoltzfus farm would continue for another generation, sustained by a combination of traditional knowledge, innovative thinking, and the patient foresight of a woman who had loved the land enough to protect its future even beyond her own lifetime. Sarah's hidden gift had saved the farm, but more importantly, it had saved the family's relationship with the land that had sustained them for 4 generations and would continue to sustain them for generations to come. The discovery of the mineral rights deed transformed the farm's future from desperate uncertainty to secure possibility. But Eli and Miriam both understood that their summer's work was far from finished. If anything, Sarah's hidden gift made their agricultural experiments more important, not less. They now had the freedom to implement long-term, sustainable farming practices without the pressure of immediate financial survival. "We have to prove that the old ways work," Miriam declared as they planned their approach to the remaining weeks of summer. "Not because we have to anymore, but because we want to." Eli found himself agreeing with her reasoning. The limestone quarrying rights would provide financial security, but the farming knowledge they had rediscovered represented something more valuable, a sustainable relationship with the land that could support future generations regardless of External economic pressures. Their first priority was establishing the roadside farm stand that had been such a successful part of Sarah's agricultural operation. The original stand had been dismantled years earlier when Eli focused exclusively on commodity crops, but the foundation post remained, and they had discovered the original sign in the barn, weathered but still legible. Stoltzfus Farm Fresh, Miriam read as they examined the hand-painted sign. Vegetables, preserves, and baked goods. It looks like Grossdaadi had a real business here. Restoring the farm stand became a family project that brought David into their circle of collaboration. As a carpenter, he appreciated the craftsmanship of the original structure and was able to repair and improve it using skills that complemented his father's farming knowledge and his daughter's innovative thinking. Mom would be proud to see this coming back to life, David said as they mounted the restored sign on new posts beside the county road. I remember helping her stock it with vegetables when I was Miriam's age. The stand itself was a simple but elegant structure that reflected Amish values of functionality and community service. Open on 3 sides to display produce attractively, it included built-in cooling areas for preserved goods, scales for weighing vegetables, and a cash box that operated on the honor system typical of rural farming communities. People will really just leave money without anyone watching them? Miriam asked, fascinated by the concept of commerce based entirely on trust. That's how it's always worked in this community, Eli explained. People know the value of what they're taking, and they know that their honesty supports their neighbor's livelihood. While David worked on the physical structure of the farm stand, Eli and Miriam focused on preparing inventory. The vegetable garden, managed according to Sarah's soil-specific planting recommendations, was producing yields that exceeded anything Eli had achieved in recent years. Tomatoes hung heavy and red on carefully staked vines. Cucumbers sprawled abundantly across their designated areas, and the herbs grew with aromatic intensity that spoke of optimal growing conditions. The difference is amazing, Eli observed as they harvested the day selection for the farm stand. Same varieties I've been planting for years, but the yields are 30% higher just from matching crops to appropriate soil conditions. Their preserved goods inventory was growing as well. Following Sarah's detailed recipes and timing recommendations, they had produced pickles, jams, and relishes that matched the quality of the samples they had discovered in the basement. More importantly, they were documenting their processes carefully, creating a reference guide that would allow them to scale up production if demand warranted it. We should test the market response before we commit to large-scale production, Miriam suggested with the practical wisdom of someone who had been studying business principles along with farming techniques. See what people like best, then focus on making more of those items. The community's response to news about the farm stand's reopening was overwhelmingly positive. Rebecca Yoder spread word through the Amish community that the Stoltzfus farm was resuming direct sales, while David mentioned it to customers at his carpentry business. Even Jacob Byler, who had offered to buy part of the farm just weeks earlier, stopped by to express his pleasure that Eli had found alternatives to selling the land. Good to see the old ways returning, Jacob said as he examined the restored farm stand. Sarah's preserves were legendary in this community. People still talk about her pickled beets and strawberry jam. Miriam's been learning her recipes, Eli replied, putting his arm around his granddaughter's shoulders. Turns out she has quite a gift for precision work and for seeing patterns that adults miss, Jacob added, looking at Miriam with newfound respect. I heard you've been making some interesting discoveries about soil management and equipment restoration. As word spread about their agricultural revival, other community members began stopping by to offer advice, share their own family farming wisdom, and volunteer assistance with projects that required additional hands. The barn-raising tradition of Amish communities extended naturally to farm restoration efforts, and Eli found himself part of an informal network of knowledge and support that he had forgotten existed. It's like the whole community wants the farm to succeed, Miriam observed as they prepared for the farm stand's opening day. That's because this farm's success is connected to everyone else's success, Eli explained. When one family prospers through sustainable practices, it demonstrates possibilities for all the others. When one farm fails, it diminishes the entire community's confidence. The night before their opening day, Eli and Miriam conducted a final inventory of their preparations. The farm stand was fully stocked with fresh vegetables, preserved goods, and even some of Sarah's flower arrangements that Miriam had recreated using techniques described in the recipe books. Everything was priced fairly according to current market rates, and they had prepared signage that explained their farming methods and commitment to quality. "Are you nervous?" Miriam asked as they completed their preparations. "A little," Eli admitted. "It's been a long time since I offered my work directly to the community for judgment. Commodity sales are different. You sell to buyers who care only about meeting basic standards. This feels more personal." "But that's what makes it better," Miriam replied. "When people know who grew their food and how it was grown, they appreciate it more. And when farmers know their customers personally, they work harder to provide the best possible products." That evening, as they sat on the front porch reviewing their preparations, Eli felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with finished tasks and everything to do with restored purpose. The farm was no longer simply a piece of property he was struggling to maintain. It had become a vibrant part of a larger agricultural community that valued quality, sustainability, and personal relationships over purely economic considerations. Tomorrow, we find out if people still want the kind of food that Grossmutter knew how to grow and preserve, Miriam said as they prepared for bed. "Tomorrow we honor your grandmother's memory by sharing her gifts with the community that loved her," Eli replied, feeling more confident about the future than he had in years. The farm stand represented more than just a business venture. It was a statement of faith in traditional farming methods, a commitment to community relationships, and a bridge between the wisdom of previous generations and the fresh perspectives of the current one. Win or lose, they had created something that reflected their values and honored the land that had sustained their family for generations. As Eli tucked Miriam into bed in the room that had sheltered 4 generations of farm children, he realized that they had accomplished something more significant than simply avoiding financial ruin. They had rediscovered what it meant to be stewards of the land rather than just extractors of profit from it. "Sweet dreams, little farmer," he said, kissing his granddaughter's forehead. "Tomorrow we show the community what we've learned about growing hope along with vegetables." The farm stand would open at sunrise, and with it, a new chapter in the continuing story of the Stoltz farm's relationship with the land and the community that surrounded it. The morning of the farm stand's reopening dawned clear and bright, with the kind of golden August light that made everything look touched by blessing. Eli woke before sunrise, as had become his habit, but instead of the familiar weight of agricultural worry, he felt the anticipation of someone about to share good news with neighbors who had been waiting to hear it. Miriam appeared in the kitchen while he was making coffee, her hair already braided and her summer dress practical for a day of farm work and customer service. In her hands, she carried Sarah's favorite harvest basket, the one with the sturdy handle and deep weaving that had accompanied countless trips to the garden over the years. "Today's the day, Grossdaadi," she said, her voice carrying excitement, mixed with the solemnity of someone who understood they were about to honor important family traditions. "Are you ready?" "As ready as we can be," Eli replied, though part of him wondered if they had adequately prepared for the community's response to their agricultural revival. "Your grandmother's recipes and your attention to detail should serve you well." They walked together to the farm stand in the pre-dawn quiet. their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path that connected the farmhouse to the county road. The restored structure looked perfect in the early light, its fresh paint and carefully arranged displays creating an invitation that spoke of quality and care. "It looks exactly like the picture in Grossmother's album," Miriam observed as they began the final arrangements of produce and preserved goods. "Like we brought something back to life that was meant to be here." Their first customer arrived before they had finished setting up Mary Kaufman, an elderly Amish woman who lived 2 miles down the road and had been one of Sarah's most loyal customers for the farm's preserved goods. "Heard you were reopening Sarah's stand," Mary said, her eyes bright with curiosity as she examined their offerings. "I've been hoping someone would start making decent pickles again. The store-bought ones just aren't the same." Miriam stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had been practicing this moment in her mind. "These pickles are made from Grossmother, Sarah's exact recipe," she said, holding up a jar of bread and butter pickles that gleamed golden in the morning light. "We followed all her instructions precisely, including the timing and the type of cucumbers." Mary examined the jar with the experienced eye of someone who had been making and buying preserves for 70 years. "Looks right," she said approvingly. "Color's good. Pieces are uniform size." Sarah always did have the finest technique in the county. The sale of that first jar felt like a validation of everything they had worked toward during their weeks of restoration and experimentation. But it was only the beginning. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of customers discovered the reopened farm stand, word spreading through the rural community with the efficiency of people who appreciated both quality food and good news. "These tomatoes are incredible," declared Jennifer Martinez, a newcomer to the area who had been struggling to find locally grown produce that met her standards. "The flavor is so much more intense than anything I can get at the grocery store." "That's because they're grown in soil that's been matched to what tomatoes actually need," Miriam explained, launching into a simplified version of the soil testing. Discoveries that had revolutionized their growing methods. "Different plants like different conditions, so we test everything to make sure each crop is planted where it will be happiest." Eli watched with amazement as his 9-year-old granddaughter handled customer interactions with poise that would have impressed experienced merchants. She knew the story behind every item they offered, could explain their growing and preservation methods clearly, and had an intuitive understanding of which products would appeal to which customers. "You've got quite a knowledgeable assistant." "There," said Tom Bradford, a local restaurant owner who had stopped by after hearing about their high-quality herbs. "These basil and oregano plants look exceptional. Do you grow everything organically?" "We use the methods that worked for my family for generations," Eli replied, feeling more comfortable with customers as the morning progressed. "Natural soil, improvement, companion planting, minimal intervention unless problems require it. My late wife called it working with the land instead of against it." By noon, they had sold more than half of their initial inventory, and Eli realized they would need to restock several items before the day ended. More importantly, they were building a customer base that appreciated both the quality of their products and the story behind their agricultural revival. "This is exactly what Sarah was hoping would happen," said Rebecca Yoder as she purchased jars of strawberry preserves and pickled beets. She always believed that people would choose quality over convenience if they understood the difference it made. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that elevated their success to a level Eli hadn't anticipated. Dr. Patricia Williams, the county extension agent, stopped by after receiving reports about innovative farming practices being implemented at the Stoltzfus farm. "I've been hearing remarkable things about your restoration project," Dr. Williams said as she examined their produce displays, integrating traditional knowledge with systematic documentation and testing. "Would you be willing to share your methods with other farmers who are struggling with similar challenges?" Miriam's eyes lit up with excitement at the possibility of spreading their discoveries beyond their own farm. "We've been keeping detailed records of everything we've tried," she said, pulling out the notebook where they had documented their experiments. Soil testing results, weather observations, crop performance data, preservation success rates, everything Grossdaadi and Grossmother Sarah taught us about scientific farming. Dr. Williams spent an hour reviewing their documentation, her professional appreciation for their systematic approach evident in her questions and comments. "This represents exactly the kind of sustainable agriculture we need to be promoting," she said. Traditional wisdom validated by careful observation and measurement. As the sun began to set on their first day of operation, Eli and Miriam counted their sales and marveled at what they had accomplished. The financial results exceeded their expectations, but more importantly, they had reconnected with a community that valued their contributions and wanted to support their agricultural revival. "Grossdaadi, look at this," Miriam said, holding up Sarah's harvest basket, now filled with the day's earnings rather than garden produce. "We did it. We really saved the farm." "You saved it," Eli corrected gently. "Your curiosity, your fresh eyes, your willingness to ask questions that I had stopped asking, that's what made the difference." "We saved it together," Miriam insisted, with the wisdom that children sometimes possessed about the collaborative nature of important achievements. "You knew how to make everything work. I knew how to see what needed working on, and Grossmother Sarah and Grossdaadi gave us the knowledge we needed to do it right." As they cleaned up the farm stand and prepared for the next day's business, Eli felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with finished tasks and everything to do with restored faith. The farm was not just economically viable. Again, it was contributing to the community in ways that honored both tradition and innovation. The bank papers had been removed from his kitchen table that morning, filed away with other documents that were no longer relevant to his future. The Stoltzfus farm would continue for another generation, sustained by the same combination of hard work, careful observation, and community connection that had sustained it for the previous 4 generations. "Tomorrow we expand the herb selection," Miriam announced as they walked back to the farmhouse. "And we start planning for fall vegetables. And maybe we should think about adding some of Grossmother's flower arrangements. People seemed really interested in those." Eli smiled at his granddaughter's enthusiasm and long-term thinking. She had not only helped save the farm from immediate crisis, she had helped restore its sense of purpose and possibility. The future stretched ahead of them like a well-tended field, full of potential that would be realized through patient work and continued learning. The farm stand's success represented more than just agricultural revival. It was proof that traditional wisdom and fresh perspectives could combine to create something sustainable, profitable, and deeply satisfying for everyone involved. The farm stand's success exceeded every expectation, but it was the evening of their 3rd day of operation that brought the moment Eli would remember as the true turning point in their agricultural revival. David arrived just as they were closing for the day, his pickup truck followed by a second vehicle that Eli didn't recognize. "Dad, there's someone I'd like you to meet," David said as he climbed out of his truck. "This is James Morrison from Morrison Limestone Company. He's interested in discussing the mineral rights situation." James Morrison was a man in his 50s with the straightforward manner of someone who had built a successful business through fair dealing and honest communication. He examined the farm stand's offerings with genuine appreciation before turning his attention to the business that had brought him to the Stoltzfus farm. "Your son explained that you've recently discovered mineral rights that might be available for leasing," Morrison said as they walked toward the farmhouse. "I wanted to discuss terms that would be fair to both parties and wouldn't interfere with your agricultural operations." The conversation that followed exceeded Eli's most optimistic expectations. Morrison's company specialized in selective limestone extraction that minimized surface disruption, and they were prepared to offer an annual lease payment that would eliminate the farm's financial pressures while allowing continued farming operations on most of the property. We would access the limestone through a single quarry site in your southeast corner, Morrison explained, showing them geological maps that identified the optimal extraction location. That area is furthest from your farmhouse and current agricultural operations. With proper screening vegetation, you wouldn't even see the quarry from your residence. Miriam listened to the discussion with the focused attention of someone who understood that adult decisions would affect her future relationship with the farm. When Morrison finished his presentation, she asked a question that cut to the heart of the matter. Will a quarry hurt the soil where we grow our vegetables and make our preserves? Not at all, Morrison assured her. The limestone deposits are deep underground, completely separate from your topsoil and growing areas. If anything, the lease payments will give you more resources to invest in improving your agricultural operations. The formal signing of the limestone lease agreement took place 3 days later in the presence of attorneys, witnesses, and family members who understood they were participating in a moment that would secure the farm's future for generations to come. But for Eli, the more meaningful ceremony occurred that same evening when the extended family gathered for dinner on the farmhouse porch. David had brought his wife, Susan, and their younger son Michael, creating a multi-generational gathering that reminded Eli of celebrations from earlier years when Sarah had been alive to orchestrate family reunions. The table groaned under the weight of dishes prepared from their own vegetables and preserved goods, and the conversation flowed with the easy comfort of people who share both history and hopes for the future. Tell me again how you figured out that the old equipment was better than the new equipment, Michael asked Miriam, his 12-year-old fascination with mechanical things drawing him into her explanations of seed separators and soil testing procedures. It wasn't that the old equipment was better, Miriam replied with the precision of someone who had been refining her explanations through weeks of customer interactions. It was that the old equipment was designed for farms like ours, and the new equipment was designed for farms that are completely different. Eli listened to his granddaughter's explanation with amazement and how clearly she had grasped concepts that had taken him decades to understand. Her ability to see patterns and connections had indeed saved the farm, but more importantly, it had restored his faith in the value of traditional farming knowledge when applied, with systematic observation and careful documentation. So what's next for the famous farming team? Susan asked as they cleared the dinner dishes. More equipment restoration? Expanded preservation operations? We're going to help other farms, Miriam announced with the confidence of someone who had already begun planning the next phase of their agricultural mission. Dr. Williams wants us to share our methods with farmers who are having problems like we used to have. The prospect of becoming agricultural consultants had emerged naturally from their interactions with the County Extension Service and neighboring farmers, who had observed their successful revival. Word of their systematic approach to integrating traditional wisdom with modern documentation had spread throughout the farming community, generating requests for advice and assistance that exceeded their ability to respond individually. It makes perfect sense, David said, as he helped arrange chairs for the evening's conversation. You've developed a reproducible methodology that other farmers could adapt to their specific situations. That evening, as the family gathered under the stars that had witnessed 4 generations of Stoltzfus farming decisions, Eli felt a profound sense of completion that encompassed both practical success and deeper satisfaction. The farm was financially secure, agriculturally productive, and contributing to the broader community in ways that honored both tradition and innovation. Grossdaadi, Miriam said as she settled into the chair beside his. Can I ask you something important? Of course, little one. What's on your mind? When I said I could save your farm that first night, did you really believe me? Eli considered the question carefully, wanting to give his granddaughter an honest answer that acknowledged both his initial skepticism and his growing recognition of her capabilities. "I believe that you believed you could save it," he said. "Finally. And I believed that your love for the farm and your fresh way of looking at problems might help us find solutions that I couldn't see on my own. But I never imagined that a 9-year-old girl could discover mineral rights, restore antique equipment, master preservation techniques, and revolutionize our soil management practices all in one summer. I didn't do it all by myself," Miriam protested with characteristic honesty. "Grossmother Sarah and Grossdaadi Otto did most of the hard work years ago. I just helped you remember what they had learned." "And that," Eli said, pulling his granddaughter closer for a hug, "is exactly what the farm needed most, someone to help us remember the wisdom we had forgotten in our rush toward modern solutions." As the evening wound down and family members prepared to return to their respective homes, Eli walked around the property that had been saved through the combined efforts of 4 generations of Stoltzfus family members. The farm stand sat ready for tomorrow's business. The vegetable garden showed the healthy growth that came from proper soil management, and the restored equipment in the barn represented a bridge between traditional knowledge and contemporary application. The farmhouse itself seemed to radiate contentment, as if the building understood that its future was secure and its purpose had been reaffirmed. In the study, Otto's weather journals sat beside Sarah's recipe books and Miriam's documentation of their summer experiments, creating a library of agricultural wisdom that would guide future generations of farmers. Most importantly, the farm had been restored not just as a business enterprise, but as a place where traditional values and innovative thinking could combine to create something sustainable, profitable, and deeply meaningful for everyone involved. The bank papers had been shredded and discarded, replaced by limestone lease agreements that would provide steady income for decades to come. But the real security lay not in financial contracts, but in the renewed understanding of what it meant to be stewards of land that had sustained their family for generations and would continue to sustain it for generations yet to come. As Eli prepared for bed that night, he realized that Miriam had indeed saved the farm, not through any single dramatic gesture, but through persistent curiosity, systematic observation, and the kind of fresh perspective that could see possibilities where experience saw only problems. The little girl, who had declared, "I can save your farm," had proved herself right in ways that no one could have anticipated when she first made that bold promise. 6 months later, on a crisp February morning when snow covered the fields in pristine white, Eli stood at his kitchen window watching Miriam's breath create small clouds as she carefully recorded weather observations in the new journal she had started to document their second year of systematic farming. The sight of his granddaughter maintaining the scientific approach that had transformed their agricultural operations filled him with a satisfaction that ran deeper than mere pride. The kitchen table that had once held bank sale papers now served as mission control for their expanded farming operation. Seed catalogs lay open beside soil test results. Preservation equipment orders were stacked next to correspondence from farmers seeking advice, and Sarah's original recipe books occupied places of honor next to the comprehensive farming guides that Miriam had compiled from their summer's discoveries. The soil temperature in the south garden is still 2 degrees below optimal for early planting, Miriam announced as she entered the house, stamping snow from her boots with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent months learning the rhythms of farm life. But the greenhouse thermometer shows we're ready to start the tomato seedlings next week. The greenhouse was one of several improvements they had made using income from the limestone lease payments, rather than dramatic expansions that might strain their management capabilities. They had invested in infrastructure that supported their commitment to quality over quantity, improved soil preparation equipment, expanded preservation facilities, and climate-controlled growing areas that extended their productive season. Dr. Williams confirmed that 3 more farms want to implement our soil management protocols, Eli said, reviewing the correspondence that had arrived in that morning's mail. And the Agricultural College wants to document our equipment restoration methods for their sustainable farming curriculum. Their consulting work had developed naturally from the success of their own agricultural revival. Word of their systematic approach to integrating traditional wisdom with contemporary documentation had spread throughout the farming community, generating more requests for assistance than they could handle individually. Rather than expanding beyond their capabilities, they had chosen to work intensively with a small number of farms, documenting their methods so that successful approaches could be replicated more broadly. "I think we should accept the college's request," Miriam said, with the thoughtful consideration that had become characteristic of her approach to important decisions. "If they teach other farmers how to restore old equipment and use traditional soil management, it could help save more farms like ours was saved." The transformation in Miriam herself had been as dramatic as the transformation of the farm. The confident 9-year-old who had declared her intention to save the farm had evolved into a 10-year-old agricultural consultant whose insights were sought by farmers and researchers throughout the region. But more importantly, she had maintained the curiosity and fresh perspective that had made their revival possible. "Your parents have agreed to let you spend the entire summer here again," Eli said, sharing news that had arrived in David's phone call the previous evening. "Your father thinks the experience is better than any classroom education you could receive." David's own relationship with the farm had been renewed through witnessing his daughter's success and his father's revitalization. The carpenter, who had once viewed farming as an outdated profession, now understood it as a sophisticated blend of science, art, and stewardship that required exactly the kind of systematic problem-solving that he applied to his own craft. "Will you be ready for another summer of experiments and discoveries?" Eli asked. "I've been planning all winter," Miriam replied, pulling out a notebook filled with sketches and lists that represented months of preparation. "I want to test heritage seed varieties that might be even better adapted to our soil conditions, expand the preserve operation to include some of Grossmother Sarah's bread recipes, and maybe document some of the old farming stories that the neighbors have been sharing." The community connections that had supported their revival continued to strengthen throughout the winter months. Rebecca Yoder had become a regular visitor, sharing stories and knowledge that filled gaps in their understanding of traditional farming practices. Jacob Byler had reversed his offer to purchase land, instead proposing collaborative projects that would benefit both farms. Even James Morrison from the Limestone Company had become an unexpected ally, providing geological information that enhanced their soil management strategies. "There's something else we should discuss," Eli said, settling into the chair across from his granddaughter. "Your grandmother Sarah left detailed instructions for a scholarship fund that would help other young people learn traditional farming methods. The Limestone income provides enough funding to establish it properly." Sarah's final gift to the farming community had been discovered among her papers just the previous month, a comprehensive plan for supporting agricultural education that combined traditional knowledge with contemporary research methods. Like everything else Sarah had planned, it was thoughtful, practical, and designed to benefit future generations rather than just immediate family needs. "She really did think of everything, didn't she?" Miriam said, examining Sarah's scholarship proposal with the reverence she always showed for her grandmother's wisdom. "She thought of everything except how proud she would be to see what you've accomplished," Eli replied, feeling Sarah's presence as strongly as if she were sitting at the table with them. As the morning sun climbed higher, transforming the snow-covered fields into a landscape of brilliant white punctuated by the dark lines of fence posts and bare trees, Eli reflected on the journey that had brought them from desperation to hope, from isolation to community connection, from abandoned wisdom to renewed understanding. The little girl who had boldly declared, "I can save your farm," had indeed saved it, but more importantly, she had helped restore his faith in possibilities that he had stopped believing were attainable. The combination of traditional knowledge and fresh perspective had proved more powerful than either approach could have been individually. "Grossdaadi," Miriam said as they prepared to begin the day's work. "Do you think Grossmother Sarah knew I would find all her secrets when she hid them?" "I think your grandmother understood that the right person would find her gifts at exactly the right time," Eli replied, looking out at land that had sustained his family for 4 generations and would continue to sustain it for generations to come. "And I think she knew the person would be someone who combined respect for the old ways with excitement about new possibilities." The farm stand stood closed for the winter season, but orders for preserved goods continued to arrive from customers who appreciated both the quality of their products and the story behind their agricultural revival. Come spring, they would reopen with expanded offerings and the confidence that came from proven success. More importantly, they would continue their work as stewards of land that had been entrusted to their care, using the wisdom of previous generations to inform decisions that would affect future generations. The farm had been saved, not through any single dramatic intervention, but through patient application of systematic observation, traditional knowledge, and the kind of fresh thinking that could see possibilities where experience saw only problems. As Eli and Miriam prepared to begin another day of planning, learning, and careful stewardship, the snow-covered fields stretched before them like blank pages waiting to be written with another year's story of growth, harvest, and hope. The little girl who had saved the farm was already planning how to help save others, and the grandfather who had been ready to surrender was discovering that his best farming years might still lie ahead. The Stoltzfus farm would continue, sustained by the same combination of hard work, traditional wisdom, and innovative thinking that has sustained it through 4 generations of challenges and changes. And somewhere in the kitchen, where Sarah's recipe book sat beside Miriam's documentation of their discoveries, the spirit of a woman who had loved the land enough to protect its future was surely smiling at what her patience and foresight had made possible. The farm was saved, the family was renewed, and the future stretched ahead like a well-tended field full of possibilities that would be realized through continued learning, careful observation, and a kind of fresh perspective that could always find new ways to honor old wisdom.